Dirty Jobs happened relatively late. I was 41, and you brought my mom up. She called me. I was hosting a show called Evening Magazine in San Francisco, and she said, Michael, your grandfather turned 90 years old yesterday. And I was just thinking, by the way, my granddad, I was pretty sure I was going to follow in his footsteps. He built the house I was born in without a blueprint. He only went to the 7th grade, but he was a skilled tradesman, steam fitter, pipe fitter, mechanic, welder, all that stuff. The handy gene is recessive, so it didn't work out for me. I got into this world. But anyway, my mother called me 20 years ago to tell me, her exact words were, Michael, I was just thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if before he died, he could turn on the TV and seeing you doing something that looked like work.
Welcome to the Beyond Speaking podcast from Premier Speakers Bureau, featuring in-depth conversations with the world's most in-demand keynote speakers.
You probably already know a whole lot about Mike Rowe with Dirty Jobs. He's voiced everything. Really, it's kind of hard to turn on the TV without hearing your voice.
It's annoying, and I apologize for that.
But we love it. And he's also somebody that in addition to those things is doing a huge amount of work to help Americans see work differently. And to encourage people who may have non-traditional, I don't even know if that's the right word, but education or giftings that may be outside of what has been stressed and promoted for so many years. And that's one of the things I want to touch on. Also, his mom is much cooler than him, so we're going to talk about that.
Also true, also annoying.
And just see whatever comes up. So I'm here. He's really in charge, but I'm going to get it started with it. So I do want to have the meat, but I also want to have kind of fun stuff because everybody's like, when they have the questions, it's questions like a lot of it leads with Dirty Jobs and your mom.
Sure.
Which may be one and the same thing with some things. But one of the first questions is, what is a dirty job that you least would ever want to do again?
Oh, well, we did 350 over the course of the show, which is still on the air, by the way. It's 20 years now. It's just, it's shocking. There are a few that I would not do again. And the reasons vary a lot. Mostly it's just, sometimes you feel like you cross it off the list and you dodge the bullet. Like opal mining is just a heck of a thing.
Really?
Yeah, you drill an 80-foot hole about the size of a manhole cover, and then they lower you into the hole, and you're sitting on a bosun's chair, and the claustrophobia is unspeakable, and you look up to the sky, and it's just a little blue dot, and you go down and down looking for soapstone and sandstone, which are indicators of opal. And if you find opal, they pull you up, and you dig another hole, and you do it again and again and again. And by the end of the day, all you're thinking about is earthquakes and everything Edgar Allan Poe ever wrote about, premature burials. And yeah, it was in the outback in Australia in a town called Coober Pedy. And when they pulled me out of the last hole, I just lay there on the ground thinking, I used to like Australia. But that was enough.
Oh my goodness. Is that the time you were most afraid? I know a lot of people don't know this, that you were actually on the boat for a bit with Deadliest Catch.
Yeah.
Is that the most afraid that you've ever been?
I kind of maintained a steady state of concern for a couple of decades. There were times when I was straight up scared, but there were very few times where I felt I'm in control. I was never in control. That was part of the appeal of the show. I was an apprentice. It was always my first day on the job. I was there to learn. I was there to ask questions. Obviously, I wanted to go home in one piece at the end of the day, but I'm not a stunt junkie at heart. And after Dirty Jobs hit, a lot of other shows came along where the titular character was defined by his willingness or his eagerness to confront some sort of extreme situation. Whether it's jumping out of a plane for the first time and pulling your own chute, or testing a shark suit 60 feet underwater and letting sharks grab you and shake you like a tug toy. Those were moments where I was straight up, scared, like a normal person I think would be doing such a thing for the first time.
Yeah.
But I was never in the category of people who wanted to push the envelope. I was in the category, and I don't know how big a category it is, but we were just simply curious to see what was under the rock, who was doing the work out of sight, out of mind, and going to towns, honestly, that you couldn't find on a map to meet anonymous people doing these things you didn't know were getting done. That was the stock and trade for Dirty Jobs.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really liked about it, because you obviously have that sort of bravery aspect, but you also have that curiosity and the humility, because you were making those people real people. Like that humility that you were the thing that a lot of times is lacking. Where do you think that came from?
Well, that came from bitter experience. You know, I write about this in the book you've so kindly featured right smack in the center of our lovely set here. I'd freelanced as a host for 20 years. I had a lot of shows, worked on a lot of different networks. Dirty Jobs happened relatively late. I was 41, and you brought my mom up. She called me. I was hosting a show called Evening Magazine in San Francisco, and she said, Michael, your grandfather turned 90 years old yesterday. And I was just thinking, by the way, my granddad, I was pretty sure I was going to follow in his footsteps. He built the house I was born in without a blueprint. He only went to the 7th grade, but he was a skilled tradesman, steam fitter, pipe fitter, mechanic, welder, all that stuff. The handy gene is recessive, so it didn't work out for me. I got into this world. But anyway, my mother called me 20 years ago to tell me, her exact words were, Michael, I was just thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if before he died, he could turn on the TV and seeing you doing something that looked like work. So that's how Dirty Jobs started. I went into the sewers of San Francisco with my cameraman the next day. And, you know, when people invite me to give talks, I often tell this story because it was the moment where I realized that everything I thought I knew about work up to that point in my life was wrong, and that I had become disconnected from a lot of really fundamental things that I had taken for granted from my pop, you know, who was my next door neighbor, little farm, Baltimore, growing up next to a guy who was really a magician when it came to work. He just woke up clean and came home dirty, and every time something was fixed as a result, you know. Yeah. And so it was his influence as a kid and my mom's prodding as an adult that led me to go into the sewers of San Francisco to host an episode of Evening Magazine in a different way. And the results of that shoot were twofold. The footage ultimately got me fired from CBS because people were sitting down to eat their dinner. And I'm crawling through a river of crap, making 8-year-old jokes. And I mean, it's just not what you expect during dinner. But it opened a floodgate of fan mail unlike anything I'd seen. And it wasn't feedback like, oh, you're so funny, or that was so interesting. It was, you think that's bad? Wait till you see what my dad does. My brother, my cousin, my uncle, my sister, my mom, right? Wait till you see what they do for a living. And if there was a moment, you know, I realized two things in that moment. It was like, there's no TV show answering that question in an honest way. And to your point, I might be a better guest than I am a host. So I stopped impersonating a host when I was 42 and started becoming like this perpetual apprentice, avatar, cipher, a guest. And that's when everything changed for me, because it was in that role that I had permission to stop acting like I knew things that I didn't really know. Yeah. Which, of course, what a host does. Right. With respect. Right?
Hey, no, I don't know what I'm doing right here. So
look, I mean, it's when in doubt. I mean, that is the only decent advice I have for people who are getting into this industry or who are standing in front of large groups of people, trying to tell a story or trying to deliver a message. If you're not sure, if you're uncertain, don't pretend that you are, because they'll smell it on you. Yeah. And now you smell like a salesman, and people's BS meter, right? Very, very highly tuned today.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Dirty Jobs was a primer in humility. Yeah. Still is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love it. One of the reasons why I do this is I'm curious. Like I just like to know things and learn things.
Nosy is what my mother would call it.
Yes, yes. And your mom was so great. I love the story. I had somehow had never seen the Big Blue Purse story, and which you should definitely check out. This is, as soon as you're done with this, of course, but you got to watch that one. But just having that desire to learn that it seems like you have, and you've had so many mentors through that. Like Joan Rivers was, just somebody that you've apprenticed to in a way. Yeah. And all these different, who are some of the best people that you've apprenticed to? Maybe some that are famous, but some that aren't.
Well, I would say at least half of the 350 jobbers that we featured on the show, probably more than that. You can learn something from anyone. Mm-hmm. And when you're engaged in doing something that you're not trained to do, that part of your brain just opens wide. And you're taking in all sorts of information, and you're learning all sorts of things, but you're also learning all sorts of lessons. And you don't really know it when it's happening. But when you look back, when I look back at 350 dirty jobs, sometimes lessons from the dirt becomes a working title. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when I'm talking to groups, I'll try and find a job that matches who the group is and extract a lesson from that job. And most of those lessons are counterintuitive to the successories that you see hanging on walls like these in hotels and mm-hmm. meeting rooms. Teamwork, right? Or persistence. Some guys in a kayak just paddling and it says stay the course. Yeah. Well, those are all bromides and platitudes, and people love to quote them. I like to look at all of that through the dirty jobs lens and say, what's the dirty version of that? What's mm-hmm. the dirty truth about staying the course? The dirty truth is, it's great advice if you're going in the right direction. Mm-hmm. But if you're not going in the right direction, it's about the worst thing you can do to somebody. Right. Encourage them just to keep going. Yeah. Straight down the dumper, right? Teamwork makes perfect sense right up until the point where you need to be a freelancer and an entrepreneur. Innovation makes perfect sense right up to the point where you realize that imitation is the thing that allows 1 million books to be distributed. Mm-hmm. The innovator has to write it, but the imitator, right? And so you can always find some sort of alternative, good-natured way to debunk a chestnut. Like, follow your passion. That's a great one. Yeah. I've heard that all my life. And some of the people who I would consider mentors have advised me to do that. But the dirty truth about following your passion is that it can lead you into areas that aren't going to pay you any money at all, mm-hmm. and ultimately leave you being the starving artist that we've all read about and no one really wants to be. So the dirty truth is, never follow your passion, but always bring it with you. Mm-hmm. And then I can
That's
tell
like
you,
number 3 on your sweat list.
That is.
3 or 4 somewhere, yeah.
It's up there because it was so true for me, right? I mean, if I followed my passion, I would still be beating my head against the wall, determined to follow in my grandfather's footsteps, frustrated because the tools he got were not the tools I got. Mm-hmm. I would still be trying to force a square peg in a round hole. I would still be screwing up the concrete pours. The drywall would still not be plumb. I would have made things inordinately difficult for me. He was the guy who said, Mike, you can be a tradesman, just get a different toolbox. Yeah. Right? And that stuck with me because I really think that mentality of work, the freelance mentality, I think that is more important today than it's ever been. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of attempt to squash it. There's a war on jobbers. There's a war on the gig economy. Mm-hmm. A lot of people think, no, you shouldn't be out there thinking like that. You should get in the box and be a good employee and fill out the forms and enjoy your W-2 and there's and so forth, right? So that experience, those mentors working on that show has formed a foundation that allows me to answer questions like yours in a different way almost every day, which I'm grateful for.
And that's one of those things, like if you look at your life, because you start off, as this, kind of rambunctious kid, to the natural step of being an opera singer, to being QVC host, to, and we're joking about that, like barbershop quartet, even like barbershop quartet to opera is a jump in its own way.
The way I look back at all of that was, it was a very strange time, because for whatever reason, I was attracted to things that were just outside of cool, the kind of things that would get you in a fight after school. Singing in a barbershop quartet was not cool. Singing in the Baltimore Opera was not cool, but both of them were incredibly fun. Being in the Boy Scouts was not cool, but it changed my life.
Yeah.
I was actually not a rambunctious kid. I was a weird, stuttering, stammering, painfully shy kid. And my father basically threw me out of a moving car in the parking lot of Kenwood United Presbyterian Church, where the Boy Scouts were meeting in the basement. And in those days, the Boy Scouts were just a gang. There was just an organized gang of kids in uniform, and it was run by a retired drill instructor. And so I just got a front row seat to a whole new world like that. And, people at school were like, it's the Boy Scouts. But I stuck with it. I became an Eagle Scout. I became a distinguished Eagle Scout. So I got that going for me. But
That's got to be one of the highlights for you, too. Like,
you know what?
They brought you back, right?
They brought me back. It was funny, during Dirty Jobs, word got out that I had been in scouting and that I had earned an Eagle rank, and people wrote who were about to get their award asking if I could send a letter of congratulations. And I started doing that, which is traditional in the movement. If you have any level of celebrity or notoriety, people reach out. I got a letter from Gerald Ford when I became an Eagle Scout, right? So for whatever reason, I was on the TV, and so people started to write to me, so I started to send out this letter. And I looked up one day, and we had sent out 50,000 of these things.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I kind of got pulled back into the movement a little bit, and I spoke at their 100-year anniversary and so forth. And so it's, just when you think you're out, they suck you back in. The same thing with the barbershop. I have a podcast now, and I write these unauthorized jingles for our sponsors, and I sing them all in 4-part harmony and just put them up there, mostly to amuse myself.
Yeah.
But it's a thing to do. It's odd.
Well, you would have to say, though, that the bass is the coolest person in a barbershop.
Without question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only one that matters. There's the bass, and then there are these 3 womanly voices.
Just window dressing. So, when it comes to that, like you've had all these different things, do you feel like you got this freedom to be all these different things from your parents? Like that it was okay to just bounce and bounce as opposed to just being one thing? Or?
No, that's a great question. And the answer is yeah. They were insistent. They weren't insistent on a 4-year degree, but they were insistent on curiosity. They insisted that I do something after high school, and I really appreciated that. That was important because I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew was that the thing I thought I wanted to do, I couldn't do. So I went to a community college, and there was some pressure not from my parents, my guidance counselors. I'd taken some, the normal battery of tests you take when you're a senior, and I guess I'd done okay on them. And Mr. Dunbar called me to his office one day to show me the path to James Madison, University of Maryland, Pennsylvania, and so forth. And I remember saying, look, I don't want to go to those schools. I don't have any money. And besides, I don't really know what I want to do. I was thinking Essex Community College. I could literally walk to it from where I lived. And at $26 a credit, I could afford to be wrong. So I was taking philosophy courses, English courses, writing courses, lots of theater, lots of music. I was taking math. I was taking things that I really didn't have any interest in, honestly. But as it turns out, just because you love something doesn't mean you can't suck at it. And just because you're not interested in something doesn't mean you might not have a weird facility for it. And so that community college is where I got my toolbox together in a different way. And that led me to this weird career where I began impersonating a host and narrating all sorts of shows and singing these weird little jingles and getting into the Baltimore Opera and just doing things that I just really had no interest in.
Yeah.
But I did them. And then, as Robert Frost wrote, way leads on to way. And the next thing you know, your mother's calling you 20 years later, challenging you to do something that looks like work. And you go in the sewer, and then somebody says, let's call it Dirty Jobs. And then maybe one day Brian Lord will ask you questions.
That really is the apex of every speaker's career, right there. I'm sorry to say everything will be downhill from here. But from that, so how did you get into Dirty Jobs in the first place?
Well,
I mean, so from that, so going from, you've already been in the sewer, how
Yeah.
do you go from the sewer to somebody paying you to go into sewers?
Well, that was also a crooked road because the footage was deeply inappropriate for the channel I was working for at the time. And even though Discovery bought it, they didn't really want it. Full disclosure, they wanted to do a larger deal with me that sent me to like Kilimanjaro and Egypt and pyramids and the Titanic. They wanted me to be a kind of ombudsman for the Discovery brand. And I was certainly open to that, but I had this idea for this show, and they were like, Mike, it's a talk show in a sewer.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, kind of. But I'm telling you, the feedback up in San Francisco was amazing. So like, okay, we'll do 3 episodes. So we do 3 episodes of this thing that was originally called Somebody's Got to Do It. We changed the name to Dirty Jobs. It goes on the air like 10 o'clock on a Friday night, no promotion. And holy crap, it rates.
Yeah.
And it's a classic I told you so. I'm like, guys, see? And the mail came in, the feedback came in. So they put it on the shelf for a year because even though it rated well, it created a level of cognitive dissonance within Discovery at the time, because you've seen this before, I'm sure. It happens a lot. When a big company has a brand and all of a sudden the consumer, their customers, tell them that they like something that they don't want them to like, that's confusing.
Yeah.
And it goes the other way too, and it was confusing for my bosses back then to see their customers love a show that featured exploding toilets, artificial vaginas, but misadventures in animal husbandry.
Yes. Yeah.
No second takes. Dirty Jobs was an honest reality show back, I think, before there were reality shows. So it was a very scary thing for them to like, to send a smartass out into the world with no script, no oversight, no supervision, no second takes, and take the results of that and actually call it a show. That was bananas.
Yeah.
So when it worked, no one knew quite what to do. So they sent me to Egypt, and then they sent me on these other trips, and then they sent me to Dutch Harbor to host this show that was called Deadliest Season, which turned into Deadliest Catch, which is still on the air, about crab fishing. And I hosted that first season, but they cut me out because the show didn't really need a host. It needed a voice. And also, it was unlike anything anybody expected. I went to 6 funerals in 6 weeks.
Wow.
In 2003 on Deadliest Catch. And when we looked at that footage, they realized, there is a world. There is an unscripted world of work out there. So let's go ahead and order a limited run of this crab fishing thing, and let's go ahead and do some more of these dirty adventures of yours.
Yeah.
And that was in 2004, late in 2004, I guess. And that's when we went to work in earnest. And, you know, we really never looked back. Once the first season of Dirty Jobs got on the air, it was clear. It was clear that we had Forrest Gumped our way into something. It was the part of the map that says, here be dragons, right? But we went there. And suddenly the show just exploded. It was in 180 countries. It was launching all of these derivative shows. Like, you can draw a straight line to like maybe 30 shows that went on the air that came out of Dirty Jobs.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And so really, my mother was right. I went into the sewer to do something that looked like work and came out baptized in a river of crap, convinced that I was a better guest than a host, and went to work in earnest for the first time in my life. You know, not as a freelancer, but as a servant to an idea, right? And of course, that idea, you know, the headlines caught up to it. That's how my foundation evolved. That's why every good thing happened in the wake of that. People liked the show for the show, but they also knew that there was something else under it that was worth talking about.
Yeah.
And so, I'm pleased to talk about it.
Yeah, and that's one of those things, like, I absolutely love, like, you know, the people listening to us, a lot of them are executives who make decisions at big corporations.
You should have told me out at the top. Hello, executive.
Hello, executive. But seeing that, so I think it's so important what you do. And if you haven't gone on, Mike Rowe Works, and that's his name, not like Tiny, but Mike Rowe Works. And
It was supposed to be MICRO.
Oh, really?
Yes, I wanted to start a foundation that celebrated small endeavors. But there was an issue with Bill Gates and Microsoft, and nobody wants to go there, so I just called it my name.
Yeah.
A bit self-absorbed, but in a hooked on phonics way, it still works.
Yeah, it does. And like, you know, you already mentioned number 3 on there. You talk about the sweat, the different things that go into like this commitment to hard work and to ethics, and that life isn't fair, which I like. And it always reminds me of the Calvin and Hobbes thing, but I want life to be unfair in my favor. That's one of my favorites.
No one who argues for fairness wants fairness.
Right.
They want unfairness. They just want it, their thumb, their scale.
Yes. Yeah, and that's one of those things I appreciate so much about it is the kind of the respect that you give to those jobs that aren't the white collar jobs. And I mentioned this before we got on air, but you know, like with my dad was a farmer and a truck driver and a really smart guy. Like we'd go shopping and he'd go, okay, all this together is $169.23, and we'd get up to the counter and they'd run through everything. Oh, it's $169.23. Like he could just do a running total in his head. And he was a truck driver, and so back before Google and Google Earth and everything, he was a guy they'd call up and say, what's off of exit 73 on highway whatever, and he could just tell, he just round it off.
Yep.
But there was this other time he came here, he came to visit me in town, and we were with this best-selling author and having dinner and everything, and it was just this nice thing. My dad just, like, he's very kind of farmer, you know, he's like, now you ever put ranch dressing on a baked potato? Like he had this weird obsession with putting ranch dressing on everything but salad. But so we're sitting there eating with this author, and the author is just trying to be nice and kind. He said, Steve, do you read? And my dad just got really offended because in his mind, he was so used to people thinking he was stupid because he was a farmer and a truck driver. He thought this guy just asked him if he actually knew how to read, if he was literate. And this guy was just saying, do you like to read business books?
Yeah.
And so much of that mentality that we have is, I don't think it's honest. Like, farmers are really smart. It's a crazy hard job.
The hardest.
So how do you feel like, what are some things that either companies can do, or our listeners can do, what you've done to help, I guess, raise the respect level or the profile or whatever it may be of people who do those other types of jobs?
Well, nobody wants a lecture or a sermon.
Right.
I try hard not to give one, but in my own world, the Mike Rowe Works Foundation was an attempt to shine a light on opportunities that were largely unloved, call attention to those opportunities, and then talk about the stigmas and the stereotypes and the myths and the misperceptions that upset people like your dad when he confronted them and saw them every day, because they're real. right? The people don't understand the living you can make in the trades. They don't believe you can make six figures welding.
Right.
I've got hundreds of people who went through our program who turned that upside down. But just so your listeners understand, Mike Rowe Works is a foundation that evolved out of Dirty Jobs back in 2008. And it happened because at the height of the show's popularity, the country went into a recession. And that's what I meant by the headlines catching up to the show. Like suddenly people wanted to know what I thought about a widening skills gap, what I thought about 12% unemployment, what I thought about the cost of a four-year degree. These are all out of my lane. But I did have opinions, and I knew what the people I worked with, I knew where they were coming from, people like your dad, people like my granddad. And so I started Mike Rowe Works as a PR campaign for 2.5 million jobs that didn't require a four-year degree back in 2008. Today, that number is like 11 million jobs. We got $1.7 trillion in student loans on the books. We're lending money we don't have to kids who are never going to be able to pay it back, unless we forgive it. Another conversation. To train them for jobs that don't exist anymore, right? So it's all become of a piece. And at the heart of your question is, how do you upend those stigmas and stereotypes and myths and misperceptions that lead people to conclude that a guy like your dad is illiterate simply because of what he does, or maybe how he looks, or what he talks like. And I think the only way to do that is to tell their stories. That's what Dirty Jobs was at base. Not a lecture, not a sermon, but just let me introduce you to somebody by way of working with them. Watch us get to know each other. Watch me learn. Listen to them, right? And as all those things come together, you'll learn something. You'll conclude something. Sounds like somebody may be murdered in the hallway there, which is unfortunate.
We're in Music City right now.
We are in Music City.
Yodeling or something out in the hallway.
What happens in Nashville stays in Nashville.
This is also a one-take show, so we'll work on it here. From that, so talking about these stories, you've been doing Mike Rowe Works long enough that you're having some success stories. What's maybe one surprising success story that you love?
Oh, well, we've got, at this point, when does this go up? When do people watch this?
This will probably be next couple weeks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pretty soon.
So in real time, like if we're talking about August of 2023, August, September, we'll be giving away $1 million. We do it twice a year now in these work ethic scholarships. You mentioned the Sweat Pledge. The Sweat Pledge is just a 12-point statement of belief that I wrote years ago that all of our applicants need to sign. It's just a proclamation of fundamental beliefs revolving around things like gratitude and delayed gratification, personal responsibility, decent attitude, so forth. Anyhow, the people who sign that, they are the sort of people that you want to hire. They're the sort of people that you want to trust. And for me, assisting those people over the years has been gratifying, but now circling back, finding them and asking questions like, how's it going? That's super gratifying because those answers are more persuasive than anything I can give you. I'm thinking of Chloe Hudson was a woman who applied for a work ethic scholarship about 5 or 6 years ago. She was going to be a plastic surgeon. She was about to borrow a few $100,000 to go to medical school. Wow. And at the last moment just thought, it's just too much. I'm going to spend the rest of my life paying this off. It doesn't matter how successful I am. So she decided she wanted to try and weld instead. We gave her maybe $6,000, helped her get her welding certificate. Today, she's making mid-six figures at Joe Gibbs Racing. Wow. She loves her job. She doesn't look like a welder. She looks like she fell off the cover of, Cosmo or something. She upends all those stereotypes just at a glance. And then you hear her speak, and then you hear her talk about the passion she has for her job. Not the passion she followed,
Right.
She followed the opportunity, but she developed a great love for what she was doing. Those stories moved the needle. And I got 1,800 of them.
Wow.
So look, that's been my good fortune. I get to meet a lot of people who can tell an authentic story about their own path. I get to write about them. I get to talk about them. I get to meet them in various projects. We even, like in the endorsement part of my world, we've worked with some big brands, Ford, Caterpillar, Kimberly-Clark, many, many big brands. And we always go in with the dirty jobs template. We don't hire actors for the commercials we make. We use employees of the company or satisfied customers. I don't care which one.
Yeah.
We don't have storyboards. We don't use scripts. I say to the people who dramatically overpay me, yes, I'm talking to you executives, but I say to them candidly, I say, look, if you want to create an authentic piece of content, with respect, I'm just not going to read somebody else's script. That's just not how you're going to get it. If you liked Dirty Jobs, if you like Somebody's Got to Do It, if you like Mike Rowe Works, if you like my book, then trust me, what you want to create is a moment where a happy customer and a fan of your brand can arrive at a point or a conclusion that's totally unscripted, but totally real.
Yeah.
That's lightning in a bottle. And if you can do it, people will pay attention. And the next thing you know, you're on the speaking circuit.
Yeah. We'll finish off with your story of how you got to be a speaker, but I do have a couple of quick questions for you here. The first one, while I'm pulling this up for my wife, is what is your mom most proud of for you?
What's your wife's name?
Krista.
Hi, Krista.
Yeah, and I stayed up late last night because she kept on going, here's my video of his mom. Here's a video of his mom. So if I have bags in my eyes, that's why.
What is my mother
Most proud of for you? What's she most proud of for you?
Well, Krista, I'll ask her when I talk to her later today. I think, gosh, I really don't know. I think she's proud when she's with me and people come up and just say thank you. Because for a while, it's hard to know how to respond to that. But I learned over the years that what they're thanking me for is holding up a mirror that they can see someone in their life reflected. Not me, but the people that we typically feature on the shows I typically work on remind so many people of someone they love or of themselves. Your dad's the kind of person. Like if my mom and I were out, if your dad would come up and say, thanks for doing that show, because he saw something in it that elevated. I know she's proud of that because it was her dad who inspired the whole program.
Yeah.
But, I don't know what your next question is, but if it's not what am I most proud of my mom, it should be.
So Krista's follow-up question.
Yes, please. What is it, Brian?
What are you most proud of your mom?
I tell you, your wife is prescient. So this is a relatively new revelation for me, and one that I'll probably talk about later today in front of whatever audience I'm going to be addressing, because people always ask me about work ethic. They always ask me about the sweat pledge and Mike Rowe Works and Dirty Jobs, and I got plenty of stories. But the real story was right in front of me my whole life. It wasn't my grandfather, at least not entirely. It was my mother. This woman wrote every day for 60 years, every single day.
Wow.
My memories of my mother all include a yellow legal pad and a bunch of number 2 pencils. And she would just, wherever we went, a cop on horseback. Excuse me, sir, I have a couple of questions about your horse and your uniform. And she would just get the guy's name and basically write a short story about this guy she didn't know, and his horse and what it's like to be a cop on a horse in Baltimore City in 1972. And then that story would wind up on the refrigerator with a magnet, and the next day or a couple days later, my dad would take it down and he would start reading it out loud wherever he went. Church, Bob's Big Boy. I mean, have you heard the latest from Peggy Rowe? And he'd read him a story. And some days it was poetry, some days it was, dirty limericks, some days it was haikus, some days it was these biographies. My mom wrote every day for 60 years. Her first best-selling book happened when she was 80. Her second when she was 82. Her third when she was 84.
Wow.
She's working on her fourth now. So when you see somebody, and by the way, she gave up on her dream of becoming a best-selling author. She quit that dream, but she didn't quit the work. She just kept writing and writing and writing. And you mentioned the big blue purse. You guys should watch this story. It's pretty funny. She wrote, it wasn't even a story, it was a letter, an email to me about the day she lost her big blue purse at the local Walmart and the hilarity that ensued when my father went dumpster diving to try and find it and lost his hearing aids. I mean, it's just a crazy story. And I laughed out loud when I read it, and then I recorded it. And I posted the recording on Facebook, where there are 6 or 7 million people who, for whatever reason, follow me. And 3 days later, I came back home, and it had been viewed 72 million times.
Wow. You've been around so many successful people. What's a common thread you've seen among them? And this is from Amber Schweitzer.
So it's tempting to say all the hackneyed things, right? Work ethic, delayed gratification, certainly an attitude of gratitude. Those things are almost always there. But I think, for me, the big one is the quality that was most embodied by John Hendricks, who's the billionaire next door. He created the Discovery Channel in 1984. And when he was asked, that same question, his answer was curiosity. And Discovery, at base, is an attempt to satisfy curiosity. And he figured if he could do that, right, something good would happen. That was I guess it was really in 1986 when that brand emerged. Today, Discovery has purchased Warner Brothers, HBO. Today, that brand is the largest, probably the most important brand in media. We'll see how things shake out, but that's a heck of a thing to have a curious kid from Maryland launch a business that buys Jack Warner's legacy, right?
That is crazy. That's awesome. So this one actually comes from, you mentioned some racing earlier, this comes from Kevin Warner from Ray Hall Letterman Racing. How does this shift in societal change of workforce ever change for the better in the future? Like, it's a tall mountain to climb, but how does it change?
Again, through bitter experience. Sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. They kind of got to go splat. And if he's referring, and I think he is, to the skills gap and to the difficulty of attracting plumbers and welders and skilled labor in general, what has to happen is the conversation has to shift from, all right, let's talk about it from the employee's perspective. Now let's talk about it from the employer's perspective, the labor, the management. That's kind of where we always wind up when we start talking about what a good job is. What has to happen is the rest of the country needs to get involved in the dialogue. And that will happen when the question becomes not, why should I become a plumber, but how long do I want to wait for a plumber? How long do I want to wait for an electrician? How long do I want to wait for a landscaper? How long do I want to wait for a roofer? How much over budget do I want this addition to be? How much do I want to pay for timber? Like, all these things get connected into workforce. And so the country the fat part of the bat is starting to realize that it's insane to promote one form of education at the expense of all the others. And it's crazy to elevate one form of work at the expense of all the others.
Right.
It's just dumb.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when that plane lands, things will tip.
Yeah, and I do want to say thanks. So David Nurse had the question. I forgot to give him credit for the one about your scariest job. And then Alan Stein about, who are some of the most underappreciated people. Another one that we have is, this one's for Rashad Rayford. What was your transformational moment when you realized this is it? This is what I'm supposed to be doing?
That's the last chapter in that book. It's the moment in the sewer when, after an army of roaches and just a river of crap and a rat the size of a loaf of bread all conspired to keep me from doing my job as a host. And I went to work with the guy who I really just was looking at as kind of a prop, the sewer inspector who had been down there with me as I was trying to host the show. The moment I started working with him and the moment I started learning from him on camera, watching that footage later was the moment I heard the clicking sound. It's like, oh, you're not a host. You're a guest.
Yeah.
Do that.
That's awesome.
That was it.
Yeah. All right, so this question, this is actually from some teenagers here, Ben, Eli, and Cam. If you want to start your own business, what's the first step you take? Meaning, how do you put yourself out there as an 18-year-old?
Well, there's this thing called the reverse commute, which I do recommend, and that's just to look around and see where everybody's going and just kind of go the opposite direction. I've had success doing that, trying to find a different way to do a thing. Now, obviously, that's somewhat contrarian. If you want to play ball, if you want to get in the machine and distinguish yourself that way, that's always going to be an option. But that's the thing they call the rat race. I just think it's more interesting to try and find a different way to accomplish the thing. And I don't have real specific advice, and I don't. Even when I do, I'm super careful to give it, because look, here's the thing: I don't know those guys.
Yeah.
And I don't know who else is watching this. And I know in my life there were times when I needed to be told a very specific thing that would have been super beneficial. And there were other times in my life where that exact same bit of advice wouldn't have helped me at all. In fact, it might have hurt me. So, I'd be suspicious of advice if I were you. I would look for as many different sources as I could, and I would try and take to heart the thing that made me uncomfortable. There you go. Not the thing that resonates. Not try the hard thing. Look, for me, it was taking courses that I wasn't interested in. It was being open to things I was not interested in. Right? So if you're telling me this is my passion and this is what I want to do, can you tell me how to do it? The answer is, not really. I don't know. But if you want to kick the tires, then explore the thing you don't care about.
All right, so last one of the user question or reader questions here, and this one I say is from my mom. She wants to know if you own a suit, and if the answer is yes, would you wear it?
What's your mom's name?
Sarah.
Well, Sarah, I do own a suit. It's rubber. I own 3 or 4 suits. None of them fit. That's how old they are. I lost a few pounds, and I had these old suits, and now they just look stupid on me.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, do people still are suits still a thing? I don't.
You can't wear a tie, but because I was like, oh crud! Whenever I do interviews, usually, because my mom would probably want me to look nice right now, but I forgot my suit jacket at home. It's either be late or be here. And I was like, if there's somebody I don't have to wear a coat for, it's Mike Rowe.
I just see lots of people who I respect who have done well, and so if I have to dress up, like if I'm going to something formal, I've got a tuxedo that does fit, and I'll do that. But for me, a nice pair of clean, dark blue jeans that fit, a blue blazer, and some sort of shirt like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that has to be enough.
Yeah.
Decent shoes, right? I'm not like well, here,
They
look.
look good. There you go. Very
These,
nice.
I mean, they could use a polish, but these are Wolverines,
nice.
right?
Yeah.
They're called 1,000 milers, and I've had them forever, and it's the same exact pattern that they were doing in 1880. It's Horween leather. They're hand stitched. They last forever. Are they fancy? No, but they look okay.
Yeah. Look good.
And so, yeah, that's my answer, Sarah.
Yeah.
A suit jacket.
And she's great. She's crazy hard working. She was a floor nurse working 12-hour days in her 70s, so she loved it. So, and so my last question for you, and this is a bit of consternation for me. So, as an agent, you have speakers that are good problems, and so my problem with you is, hey, we had Mike Rowe last year. We want somebody just like him, but we need somebody else, which is a terrible thing. By the way, do you know who the speaker is? I think that most follows you.
No.
I think it's Peyton Manning.
Really?
That's who I've had to book after you have. That's my most likely thing. So apparently he's a good guy, and amazing. I'm from Indiana, so huge Peyton fan. I live in Tennessee, so I'm surrounded by everyone. Every third kid is
Right.
named Peyton. So how did you get started as a speaker? Because I know it's not something you're like, I'm going to go be a speaker. How did this come about?
No, it actually followed the same weird trajectory as the TV show did. It was just an accident. We got into, I think it was probably 2006 or 2007 maybe, and the show was super busy, and I was really living on the road. Motel 6s, Super 8s. I mean, everything was just wall-to-wall dirt. And my business partner, Mary, sitting over there, she was just getting annoyed because she was just getting called all the time from people who were like, can the Dirty Jobs guy come and tell us some stories? You know, we think our people would really enjoy it. And I'm like, well, that does sound like fun, but I really don't have time to put together some sort of motivational speech. I didn't really understand your industry much at all.
Sure.
I knew it existed, but it wasn't something I really wanted to do. But then Mary was just like, she's like, they keep calling. They just keep calling. What do you want me to tell them? And I'm like, well, tell them I'm busy. And they're like, okay. They're calling again. Like, who's calling? I think it was Motorola. And I said, well, I don't know. Just quote them. Quote them what? Like, I don't know. I have no idea. And then really just kind of partly to shut her up and partly to shut them up, I just said, quote them whatever Bill Clinton is charging. And she's like, well, what's Bill Clinton charging? I'm like, I don't know, find out. So she finds out and she quotes him. And they say, okay. I'm like, what? They're like,
The CEO was involved in that conversation, I can tell you that.
Well, it was an innovation seminar. And they wanted me to come and talk about dirty innovations. And so I wound up saying, all right, well, this is a big deal and it's a lot of money. And I want to say something impactful. I want to please them. So I went away and I took a fairly deep dive and I thought about Motorola's impact on my own life and their technologies. And then I went back to the idea that, well, wait a minute, why is it an innovation seminar when your company relies as much on imitation, right? Your ability to duplicate the phone I'm walking around with in my pocket right now is in fact the proximate cause of your wild success. So why are we celebrating one thing without the other? So I thought, okay, I've got the basis, and then I found some good dirty job stories, and I went and I did it, and I liked it. But the schedule, this is funny, the schedule got kind of messed up, and the guy who was supposed to speak in the evening wound up having to speak right before me. So talk about following, okay? The guy who spoke right before me was Colin Powell. Colin freaking Powell, okay? Who tells the story of his dad, who's a garbage man.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, this is my, wait,
He's doing my material.
you're doing my material. He was so good. And I was in the audience, you know, and I'm watching him going, Yeah, you know what? So to be a great public speaker, what you need to do is become the Secretary of State, and then everybody will hire you. So anyway, I was a little nervous, but I tried to stay in my lane. I told the stories I wanted to tell, and then just kind of spur of the moment, I said, look, I know this is kind of off the reservation a bit, but you guys have any questions? Have you seen the show? And like every hand went up.
Wow.
And so I started answering questions, and that was really fun. They weren't staged questions. They weren't written out. It was just like people in the audience asking questions. And then we all wound up in a bar across the street. And later, the organizer came up and said, everything was really, really great. But in the end, we would have paid you just to sit in the bar with our people and have a drink with them and answer their questions. So then I was like, Mary, here's what we do. Okay, we find a bar and we find some executives with a lot of money, and I sit down and we hang.
Yeah.
So look, you'd be in a better position to tell me what's really and truly for sale in this weird market, because I'm still figuring it out a bit. But I think part of it is accessibility. We always come in the night before. We insist on sitting down with who's ever going to overpay me. and we ask, what is important to this thing? We don't do the green room with the M&Ms, and I don't have any riders and things like that. I am expensive because ultimately, whatever stories I tell, it's going to come back to Mike Rowe Works. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be a quasi-inspirational component, and I'm probably going to put the arm on the audience too, mm-hmm. because we raise money and then we give it away, and then we encourage people to apply for scholarships. Yeah. So it's a mixed bag of stuff. I usually drag them through the sewer and then ask them to recommend somebody in their life to our foundation so they can get a real job.
Great. Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming on and being part of the Beyond Speaking podcast and sharing your stories, but especially for making a huge impact and bringing respect to people that deserve it.
Thank you for joining us for the Beyond Speaking podcast. To learn more about today's guest, visit premierspeakers.com. Make sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you listen.